Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. It is time for another bonus video. This time, I will be ranking all six Peter Ustinov Poirot appearances. And of course, this is sort of like the next logical step as I rewatch all these Christie adaptations and as I work on my ranking every Christie adaptation video that's still definitely a long ways off. But again, this was the natural next step here, and I've seen a lot of requests to rank these videos. And again, the Peter Ustinov himself, he is iconic as Poirot. A little different than, David Suchet, a little different from the original text. These films, however, there are six of them. Three are, feature films, and three were CBS TV movies, and oh boy, do they feel like it. But and again, there's six here. Two of them absolutely iconic, absolutely top tier Christie adaptations. The other four, not so much. But again, these are a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. They're either really good or really bad. Um, but Peter Ustinov himself, iconic as Poirot. I know he's some people's favorite Poirot. He's my second favorite Poirot after David Suchet. And we also have another recurring character. We do have Jonathan Cecil, who plays Captain Hastings, who again, pretty terrible. He's only in the CBS TV films. He's absolutely awful. No offense to him, we'll get there, but it's not really his fault. But anyway, there are actually spoilers ahead. I did try to avoid spoilers, but you know what? People know these stories, I think, and again, I'll still warn you when one is coming. These are pretty popular stories. I think most people probably know them. Again, I'll still warn you when it's coming. But before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. At number six, the absolute worst Peter Ustinov Poirot film is not the one I thought was going to be here, but instead I have 13 at Dinner, also, Lord Edgware Dies. And, I actually forgot just how unhinged this one is. This is the first of three CBS TV movie editions, and boy, does it feel like it. And no, that is not a compliment. There's a reason CBS doesn't make TV movies anymore. This film suffers from. Well, it suffers from a lot of things, but I think the constructive criticism here is that it suffers from having just one big star. That would be Faye Dunaway, and spoiler alert, she's the murderer. This is absolutely a case of the most famous person in the film being the killer. And the films that debuted prior to this one, they all had all-star cast. This one doesn't. Outside of Peter Ustinov, it's just Faye Dunaway. And as good as an actress as she is, she's not really that great as Jane Wilkinson. And this is a role you would think would be pretty ideal for her. I would think Jane Wilkinson is probably one of those Christie characters actors should be clamoring to play. This really should have been an all-time great role for someone. And I would be remiss, though, if I did not mention another star here. That would be David Suchet himself, who in a few years would play Poirot, plays Inspector Japp here. And he's always stuffing his face with food. It's very weird. But, he's fine as Japp. I know Suchet would later say he absolutely hated his performance in this film. I have to be honest, it's very jarring to see Suchet without the Poirot mustache. Not as jarring as seeing Suchet in the film Executive Decision, where he plays an airplane terrorist. But this film is not great. I would not say it's atrocious. It's close to atrocious. And again, I should mention this film changed the setting to the 1980s, which really throws off the whole film. It's just odd. It doesn't feel right. It's also very Americanized, but it doesn't really own either the time setting or the Americanization. CBS also did this with Sparkling Cyanide, and quite frankly, I think Sparkling Cyanide is probably a little better. And it's odd because the previous Ustinovs were also set in their original time and now they're not. And I think because this is the first CBS Ustinov, it feels even worse. It also seems like Ustinov was really at pains here. Poirot feels wrong for this 1980s setting, especially since the film didn't own it all the way. I will say in this film's favor, I guess, it is recognizable as Lord Edgware Dies. This is a tough novel to pull off, and I think casting Faye Dunaway as both Jane and Carlotta was a poor choice, but I think it could have been worse. There is a worse version of this somewhere out there. Mainly, my issue with the film is the tone and the atmosphere. It's off, it's very silly. Ustinov is the more humorous Poirot, but you can still take him seriously. I cannot take this film seriously. I find it absolutely ridiculous. I never want to watch it. I barely got through it this time. So, for all those reasons, 13 at Dinner comes in at number 6. At number 5 is still not the one I thought would be last. And here we have Murder in Three Acts, or Three Act Tragedy. And I wouldn't say this one is a total disaster, but it does get very out of hand. Again, it does use the American solution to the novel. This book does have two different solutions depending on the US or the UK edition. Tony Curtis plays Charles Cartwright, which, spoiler alert, means he's the murderer. And this is another one that's like that one super famous actor in the cast, so that person obviously did it. And I did like Tony Curtis here. I mean, I thought him as Sir Charles, or just Charles Cartwright here, was better than Faye Dunaway as Jane Wilkinson. I don't think this is necessarily the best performance from Tony Curtis by any means, but the most glaring change is the setting is now in Acapulco, and it feels weird. There really isn't a lot done with the setting, which is like, then why just keep it in Cornwall? And all these CBS TV movies feel like extremely American in a way that's unnatural. I know a lot of the foreign language adaptations switch the setting to whatever country it was filmed in or made from, and it often works well, but this one just felt odd. Like, it didn't feel like it was there for any reason to do so. And we also have a subplot of Poirot writing his memoirs, and this image of Poirot using a computer is just very strange. And Jonathan Cecil, again, plays Captain Hastings in the CBS films, and he was particularly terrible here. He is terrible in all three of his appearances, but this one was particularly bad. And with no offense to Jonathan Cecil, he's not a good Captain Hastings. He comes across as a blow-feeding idiot, and it was particularly bad in this film. Jonathan Cecil is like the equivalent of Geraldine McEwen as Miss Marple. Honestly, he's probably worse than Geraldine McEwen is as Miss Marple. And to be fair, it's not so much the actor, but the content. It never feels like Hastings had anything to do in these films, and he's written in terribly. Many of the other characters had slight name changes and major changes in personality that served really no purpose. And there are times when this film gets absolutely ridiculous and out of hand, but I think the film does avoid being in the bottom barrel of adaptations. It is watchable, and I thought Tony Curtis was slightly better than Faye Dunaway as our lead character, as our lead murderer. So for that reason, I did put Murder in Three Acts above 13 at Dinner here at number 5. At number 4 is finally the one I thought would be last coming into this, and that is Appointment with Death. And, I've spoken before in several previous videos just how bad I think this film is. It was an honorable mention or dishonorable mention on my worst adaptations of Christie novels video, and I maintain this film is pretty bad. It flopped at the box office, and that is despite its all-star cast. We have Lauren Bacall, Piper Laurie, Haley Mills, John Gielgud, Carrie Fisher, to name a few. But I think it was probably better than what I remembered, or perhaps my opinion of the other two below it went down. It had been a long time since I bothered to watch this film, so I think I was anticipating something worse. There are changes to the characters where I think some of them, especially Mrs. Boynton, feel very different. The torture for Mrs. Boynton is less psychologically heavy than it is in the novel, and I think part of that is because Poirot is played by Peter Ustinov, and this is not a well-suited novel for a Peter Ustinov Poirot appearance. That's not really what the story called for. I also didn't like a lot of the things that were going on with Jefferson Cope that changed the plot line for him quite a bit. The story itself, however, is mostly intact, and I will say, in this film's favor, this is somehow the best English language adaptation of Appointment with Death, at least for the screen. The radio play is probably definitely better. The Suchet version is atrocious. This novel is in desperate need of a good film adaptation. Please, not Kenneth Branagh. The French version is much better, but again, that series is doing something different, so it's still not quite Appointment with Death. And the film is just completely bland and boring. Like, it seems like Peter Ustinov had like enough. He seems like he's just like phoning it in. The setting is now in Israel instead of Petra because apparently Lauren Bacall wanted to go to Israel. It gets very travelogue at time, and there is like a montage of the Boyntons just visiting different sites and taking photos and postcards, and just so ridiculous. I think about that scene all the time as an example of like how much I just don't like this film. However, I think being bland and boring and like slightly ridiculous is something that actually helps this film. Quality wise, I do think boring is better than just outrageously ridiculous. Not that this film doesn't also have that, but I do think this was probably better than what I gave it credit for in the past. It's still not anywhere near good or even average or acceptable, but still, I did point Appointment with Death here at number 4. At number 3, and we're finally getting into a film that has some merit. This one is not bad, or it's certainly not nearly as bad as the others so far, and that is Dead Man's Folly. And this one, is definitely a mixed bag. I would say it is mostly good. I think that might come as a surprise because I think this film has like a pretty negative reputation to it. I personally don't think it's all that bad. Jean Stapleton, that'd be Edith Bunker from All in the Family, plays Ariadne Oliver, and this is an inspired choice. Like, I'm not sure I would ever have thought to put Jean Stapleton in this role, but she was excellent. I really enjoyed her here. She's not Zoe Wanamaker good, but she's still very good. I thought she was the star of the show. Nicolette Sheridan plays Hattie, and I also thought she was pretty good. Her acting isn't all that great, but that actually works for Hattie. And the plot is mostly faithful, and I like seeing Poirot and Hastings like work out the murder hunt, though it did seem like a bit of a waste of time. Myrtle the boatman is murdered before Marlene, and this is an interesting change. I'm not sure it was one for the better, but it's also not like the worst thing in the world. And this is another set in the 1980s, and it somehow both felt like the 1980s and then didn't at the same time. A lot of the background characters and Marlene felt very much out of the 1980s in their clothes and especially their hair. Eddie South, who is the Etienne de Souza character, was really ridiculous. It was very strange. Although I will say, I think Dead Man's Folly in the 80s works better than 13 at Dinner or Murder in Three Acts. I thought Ustinov is much better placed in this film. I think this is very clearly the best of the CBS TV movie versions. Not that there was much competition, but I think this film does lack in excitement at times. It is very one note and flat. It's not an all time great adaptation by any means. It's just fine, but overall, there are two that just really miles above this one. So Dead Man's Folly comes in at number 3. At number 2, and these top two, I mean, in a league of their own here. These are two of the best Christie adaptations of all time. These are elite, these are top tier. But at number 2, and this may come as a bit of a surprise to some people, I do have Death on the Nile. And this is an absolute classic, like, iconic Christie screen adaptation, but one I think I liked a little bit less than most people. Don't get me wrong, I think this is absolutely fantastic. Angela Lansbury as Mrs. Otterborn is an absolute icon. So over the top, so perfect. It's a shame she gets murdered. Betty Davis as Miss Van Skyler, perfect. Yes, I've seen all your comments telling me I mispronounced Miss Van Skyler's name. Simon McCorkindale, Mia Farrow, Jane Birkin, Maggie Smith. Not the last time we'll see those two in a Ustinov Poirot. George Kennedy, Olivia Hussey, David Niven. This is truly an all-star cast that delivers on every front. It doesn't get overwhelmed by the number of celebrities in it. I do think sometimes when you have all-star casts, it does get a bit muddled. That is not the case here. Everyone stands out. I will say I'm probably not the biggest fan of Lois Childs as Lynette, but I don't think that's on the actress. I think that's on the manuscript. I think there are times Lynette gets a bit much, but I did appreciate how awful they made Lynette here. I think that is something that gets left out of adaptations of this book, is that Lynette herself is not particularly a great person. But again, this cast near perfect. This movie is near perfect. It's absolutely delightful. It's so much fun and pretty accurate to the novel. I mean, some characters are cut as is necessary. There are just too many characters in this novel to actually like put them all on the screen. So we don't have like the Allertons, we don't have Cornelia Fanthorpe, Joanna Southwood. Thankfully, we don't have the silly Rickety red herring subplot. We still have Colonel Race, though, and there were times he felt unnecessary, but I mean, they had David Niven on the payroll. They might as well have used them. I think for me, there are two issues I have, and these are very small issues, but it does put this one at second place. You know, one is that silly scene with the cobra in Poirot's cabin. It's so ridiculous, and the cobra is so fake looking. And the other issue I have is the tension between Jackie and then Lynette and Simon. In the novel, this tension is psychological. Jackie is chasing them down, ruining their honeymoon. Here, Jackie is still doing that, but the tension is less subtle. It's more confrontational. And I also think some of the scenes between Jackie and Poirot lack the profoundness they did in the novel. And I think the latter, just because Ustinov is a much less serious Poirot than the one in the novel. And I know this is nitpicking, but I did want to demonstrate why Death in the Nile isn't number one for me. It is probably like 1.5, but it is an all-time elite Christie adaptation. But it is, in my opinion, not the best Ustinov Poirot. So Death on the Nile comes in at number 2. And at number 1, the absolute best Peter Ustinov Poirot is Evil Under the Sun. And I think this might be controversial. I know almost everyone prefers Death on the Nile to Evil Under the Sun. Again, to me, these are very close. These are both elite, and I've always preferred Evil Under the Sun. I think the sort of comedic, goofy stylings of Peter Ustinov work with better with this script than it does with Death on the Nile or the other films with him. I know some of the plot is a little different, the diamond stuff, for instance, but I don't think it detracts from the film in any way. And while I would say Death on the Nile is probably the better quality film by a hair, my enjoyment of Evil Under the Sun is much greater than Death on the Nile. And since these are films, I do put greater weight on my personal enjoyment than I would when assessing a novel. And this film is no slouch. This is another iconic cast. Jane Birkin and Maggie Smith are back from Death on the Nile, playing Christine Redfern and Daphne Castle. Daphne Castle is a combination of the hotel proprietor from the novel and Rosamund Darnley. We have Diana Rigg as Arlena, and she plays the role masterfully. Nicholas Clay, Roddy McDowell, Sylvia Miles are all present and iconic. I know a lot of women love that swimsuit scenes with Nicholas Clay. They're pretty iconic, actually. Emily Brewster is now Rex Brewster, and he is gay, which, as you can imagine, is the subject of a number of jokes, which probably haven't aged well, but certainly aged better than other gay jokes of the 1980s. I always think of Maggie Smith saying "cherchez la fruit" instead of "cherchez la femme." It's really funny, even though, again, does not age necessarily well. I really think the cast, the plot, the humor all come together to form this near perfect film. This is an absolutely iconic mystery film. I love the ending where our murderer or murderers, I won't spoil, come down the staircase looking like $1,000,000. Just absolutely iconic. And I think that what makes this one stand out to me more than Death on the Nile is that this one seems so much better suited for Peter Ustinov. The script doesn't try to be serious at all, and I think with Death on the Nile it does, and it doesn't necessarily always fit Peter Ustinov. Again, both films are truly elite, top-tier adaptations, but I think Evil Under the Sun prevails just so slightly, so it does come in at number 1. And that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments what you think is the best Peter Ustinov and what you think of this ranking. Again, I'm not sure what exactly my next adaptations I will watch will be. I am probably due to rewatch some Sarah Phelps ones, but I don't know if I really want to. But anyway, as I continue watching these adaptations, I'm not going to rank all of them, honestly. Just the major ones, the major series. I might review some here or there. I know one of you suggested I should do actual full reviews of these adaptations, and I will be doing that at some point. I do want to watch them through first, and especially since the main bonus video series I'm doing now are the book covers of Christie. So maybe when I'm through with that, I will move on to doing full reviews of these adaptations and not just rankings. Again, I don't consider a ranking a full review. It's just like a brief little summary there, an assessment. But anyway, thank you for listening. Until next time, Mystery Files.